Hey everyone, if you're ever wondering how to itemize in set 14, this is going to be the guide for you. We're going to cover itemization from the ground up, so hopefully this is going to be the only video you need to get a very strong grasp on what to do in set 14. So we're going to start off with how to itemize, why we itemize, and why certain things work and other things don't. And then we're going to cover every single unit and let you know how to build each and every one of them. Then after that, we're going to cover who the best users are for each artifact item and each of the special new items in this set. So without further ado, let's get right into this. Let's start off with the whole purpose of itemization. So ideally in TFT, you want to create a strong team, right? Well, how do we do that? The goal is to beat the enemy teams that you face each round. And while we did cover leveling and econ in a previous video, itemization is the next thing that you should focus on. Because after you get good traits in, after you get some upgrades, after you know how to pick your augments, itemization is super duper important because it pretty much dictates what type of game you are going to be playing. The basics of each TFT comp is needing a good mix of tankiness, damage, and utility. But you also have to keep in mind that some units are pretty flexible with items and some units need very specific ones. Again, we're going to go over each and every unit in just a bit. But knowing which units these are crucial in determining your early game because obviously items are not one size fits all. They also work on more than one unit in a lot of cases. So early game items are super important to know which to build and what not to build. And obviously this changes based on the meta. But if you know the basics of itemization and the purpose of itemization, you'll be able to figure it out every single week without needing to look at any other guides. So let's talk about damage dealers first, because I think damage dealing items are one of the items that people focus on the most, and I think people should. Normally with tank items, you use your leftover item components to kind of build those, but with damage dealers, you generally want to focus on those items because the items are more contested, they're more fun, and they're more specific to each of your characters. So the first thing to know about itemization is that you always want to complement whatever traits you are running. And that's going to have huge implications on what you do during your game because let's take Viego for example. He is a Techie and a Golden Ox unit. So Golden Ox gives damage amplification and Techies give ability power. And both are very useful on Viego because he likes dealing damage and those two things kind of mix together really, really well. One important thing though is that you may notice that in some comps you go like 6 Golden Ox, and other comps you go maybe like 6 or 8 Techies. Viego is built quite differently in both those builds. So obviously as a melee carry in the front, he wants a mix of ability power, damage amplification, lifesteal survivability, and spell critical strike chance. Mana regeneration could also be used, but since he's in the front, normally he gets his mana from taking damage. But in a perfect world, you literally have everything, right? I'd say the mandatory stuff on Viego as a melee carry is for sure having some survivability and lifesteal. So you could get that from like a Bloodthirster, Hand of Justice, Edge of Night, things like that. But if you're going like 6 Techies or something like that, you are going to have a lot of ability power. So you do not need to build an item like Archangels when you go Techies. However, you might benefit from building like a Giant Slayer or a Guard Breaker on him because those two items give damage amplification, which he's sorely lacking if you aren't building anything into Golden Ox. On the flip side, if you are going like 6 Golden Ox, you get a ton of damage amplification. I think it's like 24%, and that's not including any of the Golden Ox buffs. So in those cases, you still want the Bloodthirster, you still want the Edge of Night, you still want the Jeweled Gauntlet, you still want the Hand of Justice, things like that. But you also probably want maybe like a Rabadon's Death Cap or an Archangel Staff to get him a lot of ability power that he's sorely lacking because you're not running 6+ Techies. And I know that we can't build every single one of these items in the game because you could only put 3 items on a unit, but you might get some of the other effects through augments. On the flip side, for tanks, Nico, for example, is built a little differently whether she's focused on being a strategist or a street demon. I know some builds can include both of them, but for the sake of simplification for this example, strategist gives durability to frontline units and street demons give health. Obviously it gives other stuff too, but the main tank stat that you get, which is what you want on a tank such as Nico, is health from street demons. So in strategist, you have a lot of durability, so you do not need something like a steadfast heart because that also gives durability. So you'd rather build something else instead, such as raw health, resistances, or even like utility items if you need to fit that in your team, because tanks often do build a lot of utility items. On the flip side, when you have a street demon focused build where they gain a bit of health, an item like Steadfast Heart is actually pretty decent on Nico, because again, if you're not running Strategist, or if Strategist is not active, then you're not really doubling up on a stat. Because in TFT, you don't really want to double up on stats, because the way the math works out, it's just better to dip a little bit in all the little different pools. So for tanks, that's primarily resistances, health, and durability. You should also itemize based on what your unit's abilities are. For example, Vanguards benefit a lot from having shields out, because they gain 10% durability while shielded, and they also get a % health shield. So health is very useful on Vanguards, but also things that generate shields for you. For example, like a Crown Guard generates a shield, a Protector's Vow generates a shield. So you have to keep all these little things in mind, because apart from trait bonuses, again, there are like ability bonuses too. For example, Mundo, he gets 30% more max health from all sources. So that, in addition to the Bruiser buff, means you probably want to build a Warmogs on him, even though you're doubling up on a stat, because sometimes he just really benefits from it, like in this case here. But let's go back to the damage item examples that we were talking about earlier. There are two categories for damage. There's ability power and there's attack damage. For ability power champions, like again, what we talked about with Viego is similar to what we need from the other ability power champions. Some of them are frontline, some of them are backline. So we covered the frontline with Viego already, where you need some form of survivability, maybe some lifesteal, the spell crit, ability power, and damage amplification. For someone in the backline, maybe like a Brand, Annie, or Ziggs, you're going to be building a little bit differently, because you want to focus more on mana regeneration. Because again, since your unit's not in the front, like Viego, you don't have a reliable way to generate mana, so you need to build stuff like Spear of Shojin or Blue Buff on your backline AP carries in most situations. Luckily for you, to make space for that mana slot, you don't need survivability in the backline in a lot of cases. So it kind of trades off like that Edge of Night slot that you need on Viego and maybe the Bloodthirster spot with more items to deal damage with. So for Ziggs, who's a strategist, and again, strategists give damage amp, you want to focus on maybe getting as much ability power as possible, such as like Archangel Staff, Rabadon's Death Cap, and then add on some critical strike chance with Jeweled Gauntlet. You don't really need items like Giant Slayer or Guardbreaker, even though they are still usable, because you already get damage amplification from the strategist buff. Now let's move on into attack damage. Attack damage works a little bit differently, because a lot of them revolve a lot around attack speed, so you have to identify whether your AD carry in the backline is more auto attack focus or spell focus. If they're spell focus, you want to focus more on critical strike, and if they're auto attack reliant, you want to focus more on building attack speed. So let's look at Misfortune and Zeri. So Misfortune is definitely those spellcaster type of AD carries, in that she just does most of her damage during her spell cast, and while her autos still do something, they're not like the bulk of the damage or the point of playing her. So you definitely want to build mana regeneration items such as Spear Shojin, or run a lot of Dynamo to make up for that, and then add on critical strike chance with Infinity Edge, maybe more attack damage with Deathblade, or maybe some damage amplification if you didn't go too deep into Syndicate. Zeri, on the other hand, really relies on her auto attacks. Like, her ability makes her leave echoes which attack based on Zeri's attack damage and attack speed. So you definitely want something like a Gwynsu's Rage Blade, maybe like a Death Blade, and like a Runon's Hurricane. Again, if you build other items on her, she'll still do fine, but since she's really auto attack focused, you want to prioritize the items that focus on her auto attacks. Next, let's talk about tanks. So tanks are a little weird because they use a lot of the leftover items, so pretty much you don't have first dibs on whatever tank items you want. However, the good news is that you still need to have some semblance of strategy with tank items. There are like 3 different tank categories that I think are important. I categorize them as pure tank items, utility items, and mana items. So a pure tank item would be something like Warmogs, Dragonclaw, Bramble Vest, Steadfast Heart, and Gargoyle Stoneplate. They pretty much are just like super tanky focused items, nothing really much to it. Obviously, like, some are better in other situations. So Bramble Vest would be really good in physical damage lobbies, and Dragonclaw would be really good in magic damage lobbies. But some tanks use pure tank items a lot better because their only job literally is to tank and they don't do anything else. There are other tanks that prioritize different items, and this could be something like the utility tank items. This is stuff like Redemption, although Redemption is kind of like a pure tank item in some cases. It depends who's holding it. But I think of it as a utility item in that it heals people around them as well as themselves. Sunfire Cape is another example, along with Even Shroud and Ionic Spark. These items are great at helping your team out because a lot of teams need anti-heal in some way. A lot of teams need magic resistance shredding or armor piercing in some ways, and that's a great way to get it on one of your tanks. And lastly, we have mana items for tanks such as Adaptive Helm and Protector's Vow. So these 2 items, while they can be used on like pretty much any tank, it's best to use them on tanks that are CC focused or ability focused. For example, Sejuani, she has this giant area of effect ability. Zac is another one with like a good AoE stun. And when you have these champions, the earlier the stun resolves, the better it is, right? So you want to put some mana items on them. So Protector's Vow is really good on Sejuani and also pretty good on Zac. But that's pretty much the gist of it for the tank items and like the categories you have for them. And what I like to do for my tanks, if I have 2 of them, is have one focus on pure tank, one focus on utility. If you only have one tank, you might need to mix and match the 2 or just like go with whatever items you're dealt that game. But it's just something to kind of aim for if possible. Now that we've covered most of the item basics, such as how to build your carries based on your team composition, all the categories of items you could even get, such as like what you want in an AP carry, what you want in an AD carry, and what you want into a tank, let's go over each and every champion that exists in the game. Let's start off with the 1-cost units, because sometimes you want to play around them as a carry and sometimes you don't. So I've denoted the ones that like are generally 3-stars sometimes when you do want to itemize them. So that way you know whether like they're a good item holder or if they're like someone you could actually build around. And like unfortunately, you can't build around everyone, but you could always use someone as a temporary item holder. I think 1-costs are very important in that you need to identify which ones are good item holders for your future team comp, and that changes based on every comp you play. It's not as simple as like, oh, like, let's take Street Demon, for example. Like, Zyra's a Street Demon and a techie. Brand's also a Street Demon and a techie. But if I had the choice between Zyra and Seraphine to hold my items, like for Brand, I'd much rather have them on Seraphine in a lot of cases. I think Zyra is more of like a utility unit because she has a stun, and like Seraphine can do a little bit more carrying in the early game. Obviously, this opinion changes from patch to patch, but on paper, when one unit stuns and the other unit does not, who do you want your damage items on? You want them on the one that does more damage, because if the game is balanced, the one with the stun does less damage, right? But let's start off with the top left. Normally I separate this guide out into tanks on the top left, the weird ones in the top middle, the melee carries on the top right, AP carries bottom right, AD carries bottom left. That's normally how these are all going to be organized. But unfortunately, right now, both Alistar and Dr. Mundo, they don't really have any like super carry builds, you know, like there's no reroll Golden Ox comp with like Alistar as the main tank as of yet. Not too much in Bruiser either. But even if there are, like Alistar is great to use to hold a lot of like the utility tank items, and kind of like is an off tank for your team. Mundo, on the other hand, he's like a 3-trait unit. He benefits a lot from health, so that's why I like putting the Warmogs on him, as we talked about a little more. I think I mentioned him in the past. But as a triple trait unit, he's going to be a little bit weaker than some of the other units out there. You'll notice this a lot in like previous sets and future sets if you play a lot of TFT. So again, like both Alistar and Mundo, like in terms of like pure tankiness, right now I'm reserving more of the utility tank items on them. But I think maybe if like the set changes a little bit, maybe they find more identities based on different builds. Like I know people play 3-star Mundo with like the Shaco Slayer build, but Mundo isn't like that important to itemize in that build, because when you play Slayers, you have a lot of melee units. So tanks aren't as important as they are compared to other builds. Now let's move on into the weird section in the middle. These are all champions with hero augments. So that's going to be Poppy, Jax, Sylas, and Vi. And all of them are built a little bit differently, but they all have very similar patterns. For some reason, most of the hero augment champions, like they pretty much all can use like Bloodthirster Titans. I don't know why this has been like this for every single set of TFT. I think the reason why is because generally they only introduce hero augments for some of the tank characters to turn them into damage dealers. And then since they're a tank, they're normally a melee unit, so that's why you normally build Bloodthirster Titans on them, because like pretty much any unit can use Bloodthirster Titans in the front line if they deal damage, right? It's one of those like so-called generic bruiser items or generic melee items. I know the term bruiser is a bit confusing because it is a trait, but it's also like a term in different games where it's like someone who's melee who fights and is like semi-tanky, you know? That's kind of where these characters fit when they do have their hero augments activated. But Poppy has 2 different builds. The build I like the most is the one with Archangels. So that's where you go Archangels, Titan's Resolve, and Bloodthirster. It gives her like a huge stacking mechanic to really buff herself up for the later parts of the fight. But I have seen other people build Poppy a little bit differently. They do like Titan's Handed Justice, Jeweled Gauntlet. Nothing wrong with this build either. It's also a solid build. And of course, like the viability of this build is going to be dependent on how good her hero augment is. Some patches it's going to be really good, some patches it's going to be really bad. I think both builds work. It depends on how long your fights last. If your fights are lasting a long time, Archangels is going to be better. So if you're building like a big Bastion board, like, yeah, probably want the Archangel, right? But maybe you are only running 2 Bastion, then you want to focus more on like the bursty builds with the Hand of Justice and Jeweled Gauntlet. So like, again, her build is going to depend on how you build the rest of your team. Let's move on into Jax. He likes auto attacking, so you want like the Bloodthirster, Titans, and Quicksilver combo. Quicksilver is a very popular frontline damage dealer item if you rely a lot on auto attacking or if you don't really do well with any downtime. So like the frontline survivability options in this game are mainly Edge of Night or Quicksilver. For AP users, like some people say Crown Guard can fit in that category, but like if you compare Crown Guard with Edge of Night, which I think those are the two counterparts sometimes, right? Crown Guard's clearly more of a tank item and Edge of Night is clearly more of a survivability item. So whether you want Edge of Night or Quicksilver, it mainly depends on whether you're more spell based or auto attack based. So if you're auto attack based, you definitely want Quicksilver. If you're spell based, I think Edge of Night works a bit better. Sometimes you build both though, like it depends on the set, depends on the champion. But for Jax, I like the Quicksilver a lot. He doesn't want any downtime, so that's why I build him like that. Silas can, again, use a bunch of different builds, but I think like just stacking him BT double Titans Resolve gets him the most amount of stats available. You can do an AP build on him with like Jeweled Gauntlet, Hand of Justice, but I think you just want to stack stats on him. I think that's the way he's going to be best utilized. After that, we have is Vi. Vi really likes Sterix because unlike most of these other ones, she's more of like a health focused type of person, and Sterix gives a lot of survivability with that and also gives a lot of attack damage. And then of course like Bloodthirster Titans just belongs on all of them there. Next up we have in the top right is Nidalee. She's in a weird category. She's kind of like an AP bruiser-ish champion. Sometimes she's more of like a pure tank, like, but when you reroll Nidalee in like Nitro builds, like you don't really itemize her at all. So even though you do 3-star her, it's more to buff up your Nitro unit rather than buffing up Nidalee. So I wouldn't really itemize her in the late game. Like early game, yeah, sure, do whatever you want, but pretty much I don't think she's going to be viable for a lot of the game. You know what would have been really cool? If you made a hero augment for Nidalee that turned her into a range unit and then change her form based on that. That would have been fun to see. I'm surprised they actually did not think of that. Maybe they did, but discarded it for something else. If someone knows the full story on that, let me know. Next up, we have is Shaco. Shaco definitely can be played around. He stacks up really early because every kill you get, he gets bonus attack damage for the rest of the game. And for him, like, does he auto attack? Yes, he auto attacks, but he's mainly a spellcaster. So Edge of Night, mandatory on him. It's just the best melee spellcaster item you could want. Infinity Edge makes your ability crit, so you definitely want that. Hand of Justice to complement it. Hand of Justice is really good complemented with the Infinity Edge because you just get more critical strike chance, and it gives him lifesteal because you want lifesteal in the front line. So we covered a lot of the categories for attack damage dealers in the front line with this build. So the only thing he's really missing is damage amp, right? But guess what? When you have Syndicate active, Syndicate gives damage amplification. So that's one way to get it on him. Even though it's not like that much, it still counts for something. Next up, let's move on into the AP item holders. That's going to be Zyra, Seraphine, and Morgana. So Zyra, I don't really like itemizing as like a pure carry because she's a CC unit. So she's really good holding like the utility items. Like Spirit Shogun's good so that she stuns a lot of people because she casts more often. Morello's good because like it's a utility item, and Static Shiv is good because it's a utility item. I don't really like using my Zyra for carrying, but maybe someone comes up and cooks a build about it later on and finds new ways to kind of play Zyra. By the way, in case I did not say this before, I know a lot of itemization is patch dependent, but I'm trying to make this the least patch dependent as possible by explaining to you why you go certain items versus other items. So do keep that in mind as we are going through this. Seraphine, okay, so she's a techie unit, right? Or an Anima Squad. Anima Squad gives armor, magic resist, and damage amplification, and then techies give ability power. But when you do a Seraphine build, it's mainly in techie builds, so you get all your AP in from techies, and then that way you build the Spirit Shogun for mana regen, you build Jeweled Gauntlet so her spell crits, because all casters, they love making their spell crit with Jeweled Gauntlet or Infinity Edge. And then Guardbreaker is good to 1, give more crit, and 2, give some damage amplification. And since she's an AoE champion, she often triggers a Guardbreaker. But if you were going into a more anima focus build with Seraphine, let's say that becomes the meta, you might want to build an Archangel on her or a Rabadon's Death Cap instead of the Guardbreaker because you get your damage amp from the other trait. Next up we have is Morgana. Since she's a Divinicore and there's no other 1-cost Divinicore unit in the game, I don't really think people are going to be re-rolling her. There's also no Dynamo 1-cost in the game, so she's pretty lonely when it comes to her traits. So while she's a good item holder and a great blue buff item holder at that, because she has the lowest mana pool out of Seraphine and Zyra, I don't really think people are going to be doing a 3-star Morgana carry in the late game. Maybe things change in the future, but for now, I'm just going to leave her as a blue buff item holder. Of course, you could still put like Rabadons on her or whatever if you are going to use her as an item holder, but of course, those items are going to go to other people later on. Next up, we have is Kog'Maw. He is for sure an attack focused build. And if we look at his ability, it just says for the next 5 seconds, gain blah, 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 blah. So Mortdog says whenever someone has an ability that says for the next whatever seconds, do this, you always build Rageblade on them. So we're following his instructions there. Put the Rageblade on him, and you might as well put a Runons and Deathblade on him, because when you attack a lot, hitting one more target is pretty good. And then getting a lot of attack damage so that it hits everyone, pretty good too. That's kind of one way to build Kog'Maw. Some people do like Rageblade with a Gunblade. I think that also works. Gunblade works really, really well with stacking items. Why is that? So let's read Gunblade first. Gunblade allows you to heal the lowest percent health ally for 20% of damage dealt, which is really, really nice, right? So it works really well if you have a high damage unit. How do you get a high damage unit? It's actually pretty difficult if you build a Hextech Gunblade on them, because you're sacrificing one of their item slots, which could add more damage. So to compensate for that, but say you're 5'10 and a half, you might round up all the way to 6 foot on your dating app. To compensate for that item, you want to build stuff like Archangels or Rageblade, because these items are infinitely stacking, so they give you that extra damage that you need to get value from your Hextech Gunblade. It just takes a little while for it to happen during the fight. You could also do this through augments, such as getting Ascension, Final Ascension, for example. I think it gives like 60% damage amplification, which is pretty good, or sorry, it's just 50. Or you could do it through something like, I think it's like Clockwork. It's Clockwork something to do with clocks. Yeah, Clockwork Accelerator, gain 10% attack speed every 3 seconds during combat. So those augments work really well with Hextech Gunblade as well. So along with the Rageblade, just like a nice little tip there. Kindred, I don't really see her that much as a primary carry in a lot of her builds, because you see here, like, she's a rapid fire, Kog'Maw's a rapid fire, so you could build them together in a rapid fire reroll, right? But I think you focus more on the Kog'Maw. He's a little bit more reliable. Since Kindred's a Nitro, like Nitro, it buffs the robot instead, so she really only has like 2 traits, but like it's hard to dip into both rapid fire and marksman. So right now I'm just using her as an item holder with Spear Shojin, Infinity Edge. Like, these are pretty solid items on her because she is more reliant on casting, in my opinion. But if you go like heavy into rapid fire, like you probably could do some sort of auto attack build with her too. Those are going to be all the 1 costs. Let's move on into the 2 costs. So the 2 cost units are organized in a very similar way. We have the tanks top left, weird units in the middle, melees top right, APs and ADs. So let's start off with the top left. So Skarner and Echo, these 2 units just don't really fit in any 3-star builds quite yet. Like, there aren't any 2-cost reroll Street Demon builds. Like, if we read Street Demon, Echo's the only 2-cost there. If we go to Strategist, Strategist does have LeBlanc, so you could do maybe like an Echo LeBlanc reroll build. But the thing is with Strategist is that they often are not the main carries of their build, because Strategist is kind of like a team buff, right? Like, combats start in the back 2 rows, gain damage amp. Allies in the 2 front rows gain durability. And then if you are a strategist, you gain triple the amount. So you definitely do get a lot of stats. I'm not saying they don't, but again, when a trait helps out the entire team, it might not buff your specific unit as much as it could. Like, if we assume the game is balanced, and if we look at techies, for example, techies gain ability power. So we have like a trait focus pretty much solely on buffing up that unit. Strategist does not do that. It buffs up the whole team and buffs itself more than those other units on your team. So if the game's balanced, a trait that only buffs up one type of unit should provide a bigger buff, right? That's why a lot of times strategists are not the main carries of their comp. Like, if we look at all of them, Echo's not, LeBlanc's not, Yumi's not, Nico's like the main tank in Street Demon, but that's more because it's a Street Demon focused build, not so much as a strategist focused build. And then Ziggs, like in a lot of his strategist builds, he's used as like a secondary carry or like a backup carry compared to everyone else. And that's the reason why, because strategists are more of like a supportish type of trait. So Echo, not really used as like a 3-star tank yet. Skarner, while he does have a Vanguard partner in Rast, I don't really think like there's any good 2-cost carry that really complements them. Like, there are no 2-cost boom bots, for example. But if you do use like a Kog'Maw reroll into a Skarner reroll, like maybe you could get that working. But until that happens, I'm going to leave Skarner alone for now. Alawi, kind of a similar story. When you play Anima Squad, you focus on Leona more as your main tank. There's not really an Anima Squad reroll build out there right now, because when you do Vayne reroll, who's also a 2-cost, you focus more on Slayers rather than Anima Squad, just because it helps her out a bit more, in my opinion. But again, things like this could change in the future. So let's focus on Darius instead. He's used in the Syndicate reroll with like Twisted Fate. And Darius is a bit of an interesting case because he's good as like a solo tank in that build. Because one, he has an AoE ability where units kind of wrap around him. So building a Gargoyle Stoneplate's pretty good. Putting some utility items on him never really hurt. If you ever have a 3-star unit or a unit with a lot of health, Redemption's always really, really good. So that's why people build that. So if you do play a reroll comp, Redemption's oftentimes like a decent option. And then Sunfire Cape's pretty good on him because you need anti-heal in some way in a lot of team comps, and tanks often fill that spot. Also, Twisted Fate is like a long con type of carry, as you can see here with like the double Rage Blade. So having some anti-heal effect, they generally work well in longer fights. Next, let's move on into Shyvana. So Shyvana is a bit of a weird case because she is a Nitro unit and she's mainly 3-starred in Nitro builds, which means you want to focus around using your Nitro robot as your carry. So what that means is that Shyvana's role is to support that carry as much as possible, so you build a lot of utility items on her. Redemption's really good because it heals the robot, and then Ionic Spark is good because the robot does magic damage, so you could just help the robot deal a lot more damage. So that's why Shyvana's built that way. Crown Guard is an interesting item because I like it most on tanks that are not that tanky, and I'm sorry, but Shyvana, like, I've seen much tankier 2-cost units in my day, and she is pretty solid. Like, I'm not saying she sucks and she can't tank at all, but like compared to tanks of the past, at least at 2-cost, like I feel like she is a step lower. And since she's like not a 3-cost unit, you want to focus more on like not the pure tank items like Warmogs, Bramble Vest, Dragonclaw, and things like that. What a lot of people do for these like less durable tanks is build like a Crown Guard on them, because you get like guaranteed value off this item, and that you get a max shield right away, and it keeps them up just a little bit longer. It's more like a sprint rather than a marathon in terms of tanking. You could see this a lot with Jax from the previous set, in case you were curious about that, where the unit wasn't that tanky, so people built like Crown Guard and like Protector's Vow on them rather than like the Warmogs, Dragonclaw, Bramble Vest, stuff like that. Next up we have is Ras, who does have a hero augment. That's why he's in the middle. And just do the standard like BT, IE, Hand of Justice build on it. It gives a good mix of damage and a lot of healing, which he really needs. And also, because he is a Vanguard, the Bloodthirster is pretty useful because you do get the shield. So it does give him the little Vanguard buff, as we talked about before, where you get some bonus durability when you are shielded. So that's why Bloodthirster's nice, because Bloodthirster does give a shield, in case people did not know that. But of course, if you build like a Titan's Resolve on him, like no one's going to call you out on that. Pretty much any generic AD bruiser item is going to work fine on him. Next up we have is Nefiri. Nefiri, again, is played in the RoboComp, but there are so many other 3-star units that you want to focus on that you really just put like a Thieves Glove or leftover items on your Nefiri. You don't really care too much about her. If that does change in the future, maybe there's like an AMP reroll build that goes like 2, 3, 4 or something like that in terms of the cost levels. If that was the case, maybe something like an Edge of Night would do pretty well. And then like the IE Hodge combo, like it pretty much works on most casters in the front line. Next up we have is Graves. He does like to jump around a lot, and he is pretty vulnerable, so you definitely do want the Edge of Night on him or some sort of survivability. I've seen Quicksilver being built as well, like probably not a bad option. But since he is an Executioner, you don't need Infinity Edge, which is really cool. You'll notice that pattern a lot with the other Executioners that we're going to go over. So that's why you could just get away with only building the Hand of Justice and also complementing it with like more stat heavy items such as the Titan's Resolve, because since he gets a lot of crit from Executioner, he's a bit lacking on the other stats. Next up we are the AP carries with Veigar. So Veigar's a blue buff holder. He's got 40 mana, so blue buff definitely very welcome on him. Since he gets a lot of ability power from Techie, you don't really need to build an Archangel staff or anything. You just focus on getting him to cast as much as possible. So like a blue buff, Nashers, and Gunblade, all pretty usable on him. He does like a ton of damage, that's why Gunblade's pretty good on him, and it helps keep your tanks up in that team comp because they are a bit vulnerable. For some reason, I don't know what it is, but if you do end up building spell crit on him, it is pretty fine as well. Sometimes you don't need it. I think casting faster is a bit more beneficial with like the Nashers. But moving on to LeBlanc, we already talked about her strategist. Like if you do a carry LeBlanc build, it's probably gotta get something to get her to cast a lot, or maybe do like a late game build. So you probably want like an Archangels on her, Spear Shojin, things like that. Maybe you want to build her similar to Heimerdinger from previous set, because his ability is very similar to hers in that it stacks after every time you cast. Next up we have is Twisted Fate. Twisted Fate is just pretty much he just wants to attack as much as possible. You gain 2 ability power each attack, so you just put the double Rage Blade on him, and because you have double Rage Blade, throw on a Hextech Gunblade, and he's just going to be going infinite, as some people like to say. Nothing too complicated on him. Pretty much want to stick with that build. Jin is the next one up. He uses an Exotech item because he is an Exotech. His best one is going to be Pulse Stabilizer. It just helps him execute people, and it also gives him crit. But if you already have crit, it gives him bonus critical strike damage instead. That's why you see a lot of people stacking the Pulse Stabilizer with the Infinity Edge. And then since he is a caster, you need the mana to get him to cast as many times as possible, which is why you add on the Spear of Shojin. Next up we have is Vayne, and she's just like an auto attack champ. She likes attacking a ton of times, so that's why you just do a double Rage Blade build. And then for third item, you could do like a Gunblade, but Runon's Hurricane is also pretty good at spreading the love a bit. So you could do like maybe Rage Blade, Runons, and Gunblade, or like double Rage Blade Runons when you go for those Vayne builds. Let's move on over into 3 cost now. Let's start off with Mordekaiser. He's another Exotech unit. He really likes Corrupted Chassis. I think that's his best Exotech item. You could look at all the Exotech items here, by the way. Teamfight.lol. Use the team builder. They're like the Radiant versions and then the regular versions. The other tank one is like the Repulsor Lantern and like this mark thing. It gives like marks on people. But the best one for him is definitely Corrupted Chassis. And then for Mordekaiser, I like putting utility items on him. You could do a pure tank build on him though. I think both builds work. He's more of like a CC unit and shield unit, which is why I kind of build him this way. Like other tanks, they just like, you'll see more in the 4 costs and stuff where I build more of like the full-on tank items, and that's because their abilities like kind of power themselves up a lot. Like when you have a shielding unit, you want to focus more on resistances, but if you have a stun unit, you generally put your utility items more on them because they're not as purely tanky as some of the other tank units. This one's kind of both, but I like focusing more on the utility items on him. So like Sunfire Redemption, pretty good stuff. Redemption is going to be really good in a 6 bruiser build because it just heals all your other tanks really quickly. Next one up we have is Braum. He's a great pure tank. Braum is really good because like he gains a shield and then he chills people. So what chilling does is that it reduces the attack speed of enemies affected by it. So even though it's not really a stun, it reduces damage a lot still. But for Braum, he's often built a lot in Syndicate builds, and Syndicates, their biggest tank is going to be a 3 cost unit. So there's Misfortune at 4 costs, there's Braum at 3 costs, and then there's Darius and Twisted Fate at 2 costs, and then Shaco at 1 cost. So as far as Syndicate tanks go, he's going to be the main guy, so that's why you need to build one of them as like a pure tank, and he's probably just the best candidate for it as his ability just gives him like the most tank stats compared to the other units there. But of course you still could use him as a utility tank. Pretty much all tanks, they use the leftover items, so just whatever you have, slam them on him and he'll do just fine. Jarvan's going to be the one next. Another great utility user. He's played in a lot of Slayer comps, some Golden Ox comps sometimes, but mainly in the Slayer comps right now. So since Slayers do a ton of damage, you just want to focus on killing things as quickly as possible. Building support items on him is going to be really good because if you have an even Shroud on your Jarvan, that means you don't have a Last Whisper on whoever's like your Slayer carry, like let's say it's Vayne or something like that. That saves her a full item slot, so she could build 2 Rage Blades instead of 1. Galio is in a bit of a weird spot. He is a Cypher unit, so I don't think people are going to be playing him as often as others, but if you do get like the Cypher cash out, one of them is like a 3-star Galio. You still have to itemize him in some way, and if we read him, he gains durability. Pretty much when you get that cash out, you also get a 3-star Draven, so you definitely want to pair him up with the Even Shroud so that you could save an item slot on Draven so he doesn't have to build Last Whisper. But of course, like one of them needs one of them, right? So it's like either or. It doesn't really matter which. But if you don't have that, you could always add on like some extra generic tank item, maybe like Warmogs, Bramble, things like that. Pop quiz: after reading his ability, would you build Steadfast Heart on him? It's not the end of the world if you do, but since he gets durability from his ability, probably don't need to build that on him. Like you'd much rather have like a Warmogs, because flat health also works pretty well with durability because you have more health to be durable with. Next one up we have is Gragas. He does have a hero augment, so we're going to itemize him around that. Again, since you're playing him in like a tanky build, because you're probably going to be playing some form of bruisers, I like dropping the Archangels on him so that he lives a long time and is able to stack it up pretty easily. And then you just throw the classic combo of BT Titans, call it a day. Rengar, he likes BT Titans as well. But oddly enough with him, I think he's durable enough himself that he doesn't need the Edge of Night or like the Quicksilver. Don't get me wrong, they're still playable on him, but I think just going like triple items on him, sometimes a lot of the dash champions, they're durable enough without needing Edge of Night. Like for example, Smeech from last set was the same. Like, is Edge of Night good on him? Yeah, it is good on him, but most people were building like Stare Eggs and like double healing, similar to what you see here. And again, it's just because like one, they're 3-cost units, so 3-cost 3-star, a bit more durable than other units. And then two, since they dash around a lot, sometimes they don't get focused as hard. Normally you want to build an Edge of Night when they do get super focused. And while I don't think he has like built-in Diagra, like sometimes some of the dash champions do have a Diagra. I don't think he has it, but I swear sometimes it feels like he does. And that's just because he like jumps all over the place and gets out of range of some characters. Next one up we have is Fiddlesticks. The 3-star Fiddlesticks reroll comp is really popular with Bruisers. So what you do there is you just put Bruiser emblem on him and then you put double Archangels on him. And you might be wondering, why don't we build like a Bloodthirster on him since he's like 2 range, right? Well, one, he's 2 range, so he's a bit safer. And 2, he does have built-in lifesteal. He heals for 15% of his damage dealt, so he doesn't really need Bloodthirster compared to other champions. So a lot of melees you may have noticed build 2 sources of healing. For example, Rengar has like Bloodthirster and Handed Justice, and then like some of the Slayers, they build like Bloodthirster, and then also Slayer heals themselves too. From the Slayer trait, it gives some Omnivamp. And the reason why is because sometimes like when you're 1 range, you do need that extra boost, but at 2 range, like you just need the 15%, you know? Anything more than that is a bonus, but it's not like as required. So Fiddlesticks has his built into his kit, so you just focus on dealing a lot of damage. Next one up we have is Varus. Varus is an executioner, so you do not need Jeweled Gauntlet, so instead you build stuff like Hat. You could put on the Guard Breaker for some damage amp and additional crit. And then lastly, Spirit Shojin to cast a lot. Not too many arguments here. If you have a really tanky team, instead of the Rabadon's Death Cap, you could build an Archangels instead because he'll live longer and stack up a lot later on into the fight. And then if you're using Varus as like a support unit or like a secondary or tertiary DPS unit, you could always put like a Morellonomicon or a red buff on him to spread like an anti-heal effect. Next one up we have is Elise. Elise, like, kind of in a weird spot. Like, there isn't really any Dynamo rerolls, but sometimes she gets 3-starred in Nitro builds. Just do generic AP items on her, just like the Shojin, Jeweled Gauntlet, Guardbreaker, Rabadons, Archangels, things like that. You can't really argue too much with any specific itemizations on Elise because, one, she's not really played that much, and 3-star Elise probably isn't going to get played that much this set. Like, all the Nitro builds are focused more on the 1 and 2 costs. Dynamos, maybe they can make it work. Like Dynamos, I think more of like Misfortune and Aurora, but perhaps like you can mix in like a Rabadons over the Guardbreaker or like an Archangels. Again, it depends on how tanky your team is. Yuumi is a strategist and like pretty much just like a do nothing unit. I feel like there are just better carries out there. Again, there are no strategist 3 costs in terms of like anima units. There are no anima 3 cost units. In terms of AMP, there are no AMP 3-cost units, so it's just pretty difficult to reroll her. So unless she gets like massively buffed, I don't think that many people are going to be playing her. But if you were going to itemize her, she does gain a lot of mana. Maybe you're going to build a blue buff on her to lower her mana pool. That way the 3 mana per second means even more. And then build some AP, maybe some crit. But just because a unit isn't played around as like a main carry doesn't mean you can't use it in other ways. You could always put like a static Shiv on her if you have extra unit slots and you want to have full items on your primary carry or even secondary carry, because often when you play Yuumi you play Ziggs, and Ziggs is often a better item holder for like those leftover items because he's a 4-cost versus a 3-cost unit. Next up we have is Draven. He's a caster focus unit, so Shojin is good, IE is good. Those two are no-brainers. But White Last Whisper, he hits a lot of units. He like throws his axes out and they hit like a ton of units. So you get a ton of value off this Last Whisper, which is why I like it on him. Another thing you could use is Red Buff. Red buff is pretty good on Draven because, again, he just throws his axes out and they hit a ton of units. So I actually find that he does a lot of damage with like Red buff and Last Whisper because it just provides a lot of utility to your team. But of course, if you are just focused on him, you could just do like a Spirit Shojin, IE, and then just like any other generic AD or damage item on him after that. Next one up we have is Jinx. Jinx has the same build as Draven for the same exact reasons. Like she fires 5 rockets, so it hits a ton of people. So again, spreading the love with like Last Whisper or even like a red buff is pretty good. She's more of a caster focus build like most marksmen are because marksman just gives AD. So Spirit Shojin and IE also makes sense there. Next up, let's go to Senna. Senna is more of an auto attack champion. You can see here, passive attacks deal 40% physical damage to enemies adjacent to the target. Whenever you have like AoE champions, like often Runon's is pretty good because oftentimes when you use an AoE, nothing dies. So when you add even more, hopefully they do die. There's like a very fine line between that. And then since she's more auto attack based, since again her attacks deal 40% damage to adjacent targets, you want to focus more on auto attack items such as like Rage Blade, maybe a Death Blade. Last Whisper is also good because again she hits a ton of people. So pretty straightforward stuff there. Obviously with her, like Slayers give a lot of built-in AD, so you don't really need the Death Blade. Like even though it's still good to build a Death Blade on her, you don't need that. You'd much rather have like a Giant Slayer maybe, and that way you get some damage amp into your build. Now let's move on into the forecasts. So forecasts are like the main carries of most teams, so it's pretty important to know these things, but luckily their itemizations are pretty easy in my opinion. There's like some deviation, but most items that make sense kind of fit on these champions. So for the tanks, we have Leona, Neeko, Cho'Gath, and Sejuani, and you need to categorize them into different categories. Some are super tanks, some are utility tanks, and some are like the mana tanks. So let's start off with Sejuani. Like I consider her one of those like mana tanks in that you want her to cast as quickly as possible. I know she has this passive, gain more armor and magic resist from all sources, which is fine and dandy, but she already gets a lot of that value from the Bastion trait. So what I'd rather do with Sejuani instead is build all the mana tank items. So like Protector's Vow and Adaptive Helm, to some extent Redemption, just anything that gives her mana. That way she casts faster because she has the best AoE CC in the game right now. So that's where she's gonna get most of her value. It's gonna be from casting really, really quickly. One special shout out, she is an Exotech, so Repulsor Lantern I think is the best one for her. Gain 5% health every 3 seconds, deal 6% of the holder's max health as magic damage to all enemies. And then another option is going to be the Cyber Coil. This one marks enemies that she damages, and then she heals for some of the damage that they take. But we got the simple one out of the way. Let's go on to Leona, who I think is a very good super tank in general, whatever you want to call it, but just the generic like tanky tank items will do for her because I think she works really well with them. Obviously, with tank items, we don't build specific ones all the time. So if you have like utility ones, such as like Sunfire Cape, Redemption, even Shroud, Ionic Spark, depending on what comp you're running, like those are all going to be good. Like pretty much any tank item she's going to use really, really well, and you definitely want to itemize her. Same thing with Neeko. One thing I'd like to point out though is that Neeko is a strategist, so she's mainly played in a lot of ability power composition, so that's why I really like the Ionic Spark on her. That way you get the magic resist shred on your team and you can focus on building your AP carries after that. Also, since she gets a lot of durability from strategists, you want to focus on like health and resistances, and since you have fewer item slots, you can't do the Bramble Declaw Warmogs combo, so you just do like a Warmog Stone Plate with the Ionic Spark. It kind of works decently well. Also, a lot of strategist builds don't have too many tanks, and Stone Plate works really well in comps that don't have like 10 tanks or something like that. Well, no comp has 10 tanks, but some of them have like 6 tanks, some of them have like 3 tanks. Like Neeko's more in those like fewer melee unit comps. Next up we have is Cho'Gath. Cho'Gath kind of works with everything. Like you could build him pure tank, you could build him utility tank, you could even do some like AP builds on him with like crown guards and stuff like that. Like I've seen all sorts of stuff work on Cho'Gath. I don't really think it matters. So pretty much on Cho'Gath you could build whatever you want. Next up, we only have one melee carry and 4 costs in this set, and that's Zed. So i.e. Edge and Knight. I think Edge and Knight is mandatory. It's like a very good item on like most melee carries. It just keeps them alive really, really well, and no other item does it quite like it. After that, Infinity Edge and Hand of Justice are both very solid options, as a lot of his damage does come from his ability, so that's why you like Infinity Edge. And then Hand of Justice is just the best healing item to complement Infinity Edge. If you don't have Infinity Edge because you have an emblem on him, for example, some people like playing Divinicorp Zed, then you don't build Hand of Justice. I mean, it's still fine, but like you'd prefer like a Bloodthirster because you're not taking advantage of the extra crit as much as you would have with the IE. Next up we have is the AP carries with Brand. So a lot of these AP carries like Brand and Ziggs, for example, they do a lot of AoE. So what I like to do with them is do like the Shojin, Jeweled Gauntlet, and Guardbreaker build. You'll notice that I use Guardbreaker on a lot of these backline carries, same with Vex. So the reason why Guardbreaker is good is because 1, the patch just makes it so right now, and 2, a lot of people are building Jeweled Gauntlet or they get crit from other sources, like Vex gets it from Executioner. So getting a little more crit really helps out your ability a lot more, makes it more reliable. And then since they're giant AoEs, you're bound to hit someone with a shield, so you get the damage amplification pretty easily. That's why a lot of people are doing these builds on units that get AP from somewhere else. So for Brand, Techies, and Street Demon, they both give AP. So he doesn't need to build any. He does not need an Archangels. He does not need like a Revenant's Death Cap. Still a fine item, just not like the super preferreds. Next up we have is Ziggs. Ziggs is a bit of like a supportish unit because he is a strategist after all, but he could do some carry builds too. But I think if I play Ziggs like with an Annie, or if I play Ziggs with a Brand, I focus more of my main items on like Brand and Annie, and then use my leftover damage items on my Ziggs. So some good leftovers on him is going to be like a Morello or a red buff to provide anti-healing if you don't have a Sunfire Cape. Static Shiv is pretty good if you don't have an Ionic Spark. And then of course like Spirit Shojin, just get him to cast more with the Morello, works pretty well too. I'm not saying damage builds can't work on Ziggs, of course they can. If you were to do something like that, I'd probably go like Spirit Shojin, Archangel, and then like a Jeweled Gauntlet, and he's going to do pretty well in a lot of those cases. Next up we have is Vex. Vex is pretty much the same as Brand. She gets the crit from her trait, but she doesn't get AP from her trait, so that means you build the Rabadon's Death Cap to make up for that. After that, you get the Guard Breaker in, just a solid item because she hits a bunch of units. And then lastly, instead of the Spirit Shojin, she likes having a blue buff because she has a 30 mana pool. Units with a smaller mana pool generally like blue buff a lot more than Spirit Shojin. Like Brand has 70 mana, Vex has 30 mana, so yeah, you could obviously see the difference why. Annie is going to be the last AP damage dealer. She just likes casting a lot, so some people are saying she needs a rework because right now, like, she needs all three of these items, blue buff, Shojin, and Nashor's Tooth, just so she could cast really quickly and just go infinite casting. That way she summons Tibbers as much as she can because Tibbers is going to be her best ability. So her build is not flexible unlike these other 3 AP carries unless they kind of change something in the future, or maybe someone discovers like a new build that's like completely bonkers on Annie. But again, right now, it's all about the Tibbers build, so you want to just cast a bunch to get him out there and pretty much explode people. Next up we have is the AD carry. So they're in 2 categories. I'd say Misfortune and Xayah are kind of related, and then Zeri and Aphelios are more related as well, because Zeri and Aphelios, they focus a lot on auto attacks. Misfortune and Xayah focus more on casting. So the 2 casters, Misfortune and Xayah, really like Infinity Edge, and they also like Spirit Shojin so that they could cast more often. Now if you play her in like a regular Syndicate build, Spirit Shojin I'd say is pretty mandatory, but I have seen some data, not too much on it, where people just skip the Spirit Shojin completely. They go triple damage item on her when they go for Dynamo, because again, you get the mana from Dynamo. But I think Spirit Shojin's just a fine item in general. Like, you could do the triple damage item. You'd go something like IE, Giant Slayer, Guard Breaker, or like maybe a Last Whisper if you don't have that effect yet, or even like a Deathblade to just get more raw AD. But it's something you could kind of experiment with Misfortune. I know I said you always want to dip your toes in like all the little different buffs you can get, but in like all of TFT history, all the units that get mana from some random source, they still build mana items, and for some reason that's just always been true. I'm not sure why, I'm not sure how. Maybe it's because they adjust the mana numbers for all those units to be a bit bigger. That way they still need to build the mana item, but I think there's only like one case where there was a unit that did not need a mana item that relied on casting a lot, but maybe I'm just forgetting about some examples in the past. But moving on to Xayah, she's going to be a marksman and anima squad, so she gets a lot of attack damage from the marksman trait, but just a standard build on her. Last Whisper, IE, Shojin, going to be doing fine. Last Whisper is pretty good because she hits a lot of different units, so she applies the buff to a lot of people. Like Last Whisper, it could be useful on every single attack damage carry, but it's best on those that do a little bit of AoE. Just one thing to keep in mind. But of course, if you have Xayah as your main carry and then someone else as a secondary, you could always remove the Last Whisper, put it on someone else, and then build any other attack damage item on Xayah to get her to deal more damage. Or maybe you have an Even Shroud, and then the same logic applies. Next up, we have is Zeri. Her best exotech item is going to be the Flux Capacitor. Attack store charge. At 25 charges, the next attack consumes the charge and deals 15% of the target's max health as physical damage, and reduces their total armor by 4. This is obviously going to pair well with a unit that attacks a lot, which is exactly what Zeri does. So you want to build the Rage Blade on her. Remember how I said previously, I think it was on the 2 cost, like whenever you have a unit that says when you cast, do XYZ for like a bunch of seconds. Zeri's doesn't exactly say that, but they have echoes that pop out that last for a bunch of seconds, so it kind of is the same thing. So based on that logic, like Rage Blade is always going to be really good on her. And then whenever you build a Rage Blade or a stacking item, then the Gunblade is going to complement them pretty well. Other stuff you could build on her is like Runons. Maybe you don't have an Exotech item that works on her. Deathblade's going to be working pretty well because she's really just an auto attacker, so you just want to stack that up as much as possible. Next up we have is Aphelios. Pretty similar concept to Zeri, except he does not have an Exotech item. You could always drop in a Last Whisper. He hits a lot of different units, so it's pretty useful on him. But obviously, like a Runons could work, a Deathblade could work for the third item slot. Like the only mandatory item I'd say is the Rageblade. Everything else is kind of whatever you get that game. Another thing to note about the Hextech Gunblades that I've been pointing out is that you generally only want to build Gunblade and Rageblade on teams that have very strong tanks. So for example, if you're playing like 4 marksman Aphelios, but maybe you don't have that many tanks, maybe you just have like 2 Vanguard and then a bunch of other damage units, I would not build him with a Rageblade. But if you're building like 4 or 6 Vanguard with the marksman, then yeah, Rageblade's going to work because you have a lot of time that you could buy for your team. That way he could build up the Rageblade stacks and then get a ton more value from Hextech Gunblade. There's just one little thing to keep in mind when you are building these units. Let's move on into the 5 costs though. These are going to be the legendary units, of course. Very exciting stuff. Not too many of them. There's always fewer legendary units in every set. But we have them sorted in like kind of a weird way because there are a lot of like hybrid-esque units or like weird units at legendary, which is normally the case. So first off, let's start off with Zac. Zac is a casting unit, but he also splits up. So you definitely want him to cast really early because he's got an AoE CC. He bounces a bunch of times and stuns people, so that's very useful. You definitely want some mana item on him, but he also has a splitting effect. So you can get multiple copies of Zac on the board at the same time. That means a lot of the utility items like Ionic Spark are going to stack up together because this deals damage whenever someone casts. Sunfire Cape, he could apply it to more people. Redemption, he could heal more people on your team, but I will say Redemption does not stack, so if they're next to each other, it doesn't do as much as you think it would. But pretty much any item that has like some AoE effect, it's going to be good on Zac because he's going to apply it to a lot of different people. Next up we have is Kabuko. Kabuko is a very good AP bruiser. Like, Kabuko can be built in all sorts of ways. I've seen like damage Kabuko, I've seen tank Kabuko. Just get any 3 items on Kabuko and you're going to be fine. It really doesn't matter which items, just make sure he has 3 items. If you want to go more like hybrid build, then like the Ionic Spark plus Crown Guard is a great combo. But honestly, any build works on Kabuko. Same with Renekton. Like, I find Renekton works best with the AD bruiser items such as like Titan's Resolve, Bloodthirster, Starex, things like that, even like a Edge of Night, Quicksilver. But if you build like full tank on him, like he's still a Bastion unit, so he's still gonna get a lot of value off of that. But obviously, if you are able to steal a lot of attack damage from one of your teammates, he's going to work much better with the damage-oriented builds. But that's kind of the thing with a lot of legendary units. You are not able to pick and choose their items as specifically as you would a 4 cost, so you often just use leftover items on them, and that's why it is good that they are designed that they could use all sorts of different stuff. Next up we have is Garen. I don't itemize my Garen too much. Often I use the mods on other people, but if I do get a 2-star Garen, I will itemize him, and then just the generic like AD Bruiser combo would work. Like the same items that work on Renekton would work on Garen. Nothing really too complicated there. Next up we have is Viego. Viego's an AP caster, but as we talked about in the intro, he has different builds based on what trait you're focused on. So if you're heavy into techie, something like the Hand of Justice Jeweled Gauntlet build is really, really nice because you get a lot of AP from the techie trait, and that's like the main way he scales. Edge of Night, pretty much always mandatory on him because you need him to survive, and that's just the best melee survival item, even though it does not give any stats that he kind of likes that much. If you're going more Golden Ox build, you might want to replace one of these items with an Archangel Staff or a Rabadon's Death Cap to get some AP. And maybe you want to get the lifesteal from like one of your augments. There are a lot of healing augments. One of them is called like Invested Something, or Health is Wealth. That's what it is. It's when you gain Omnivamp for your team, and then after you heal a certain amount, you get a bunch of gold. Pretty good stuff. It pretty much gives as much healing as like all the other healing items, a little less. I think most of them give like 20. How much does Hand of Justice give? This one gives 12% Omnivamp, but doubled to 24 when you're below 50% health. Bloodthirster, I think, gives 20%. So it obviously gives less. If you're able to do a ton more damage, like obviously you're going to heal the same amount to kind of compensate for that. But there are a lot of different augments that do give Omnivamp, and there are other ways to get Omnivamp on your team. Just make sure you get a little bit of everything that Viego needs and don't just focus on one stat. Next up we have is Aurora. Aurora is a bit interesting. I think she's the best Morello item holder in the entire game right now. She just hits so many units, and she casts like pretty often that she keeps a buff up, so no one really has a chance to heal back up. So Morello, I think, is a guaranteed item on her, like you just need it. After that, like Spirit Shoujin's nice to get her to cast more, And then Archangels is pretty good because she jumps to your bench. That means she has 0% chance to die really, really early, so you are able to guarantee getting some Archangel staff stacks on her, which is obviously just free value that you can get. But apart from these 3 items, like any of the AP items will work on her. There's no like mandatory item on her apart from like the Morellonomicon, but whatever you can get for your legendary units is gonna work just fine. Next up we have is Samira. She's a bit interesting because she jumps in like a idiot and does a bunch of damage. So she does have some built-in Omnivamp, but I think I like a little bit more with the Hand of Justice. Like I've done triple damage Samira. I've also tried Hand of Justice Samira. Is there that much of a difference? No, there isn't. They're both very good as long as you get 3 usable items on her. But I feel a little bit safer with the Hand of Justice than I do with just like IE, Guardbreaker, and Giant Slayer, for example. Don't get me wrong, like both builds work. Like any good item on Samira, she'll do just fine. But I find that since she jumps in a lot, having like the double healing effect does feel pretty good, especially since I think the Omnivamp from her spell only works during her spell, not during the other times. But she's a caster unit, so you want the IE, and then after that, like anything is up to you, any AD generic item. Last up we have is Urgot, and his builds are really weird. Like I'm not 100% convinced like I found the best build on him yet, but he has one of those like for a bunch of seconds effects, so that's why people like the Rage Blade on him. I find it okay. It's not my favorite, it's not my least favorite either. And then since he does rely on his spell a little bit, that's why people build the Infinity Edge. That's like a weird thing, right? Like most of the AD carries we've had in the set, they're either attack focus or they're spell focus, but this guy's kind of both, which makes it a little bit difficult to itemize. That's why people have been building like all sorts of stuff on Urgot, but Rage Blade and Infinity Edge have been the 2 most popular options. After that, you could do something like a Last Whisper, a Giant Slayer, a Deathblade, a Guardbreaker, even like a red buff Runon's Hurricane would probably work too, or even like a Gunblade because you could pair it up with the Rage Blade. Like so many different things work on Urgot. But that's kind of the thing about legendaries. It doesn't really matter too much what you build on them as long as they're like semi-usable. If you have a 2-star legendary, they're gonna be cranking out a lot of work no matter what. So that's why when you build items, focus on like your early to mid game carries, because they'll get you to the late game, and then none of this other stuff matters, right? You don't need perfect items on your legendary units. But now that we've covered all that, I want to talk about like the weird items such as artifact items, radiant items, and emblems. So radiant items and artifact items, when do you want them? Well, you generally want them when you focus your team comp around like 1 or 2 units. And the reason why is because there's only so many resources you get in TFT. Like when you get an augment selection, you could get like a combat augment, an economy augment, a trade augment, or an item augment. So when you look at the item augments, some of them either give a lot of items, such as buried treasures or something like that, and some of them give you focus items, like an artifact item, like portable forge or like living forge. Some of them give a radiant item. And that means when you pick a radiant or artifact item, you sacrifice other things in your game. Like obviously I'd want every single one of my units to have a radiant item, even my like crappy units, right? Like if I had unlimited resources, like yeah, I would want that. But since we are in a game with limited resources, we can't just do that. So the only times you want artifact and radiant items is if you have like one of those really weird interactions with artifact items that work really well with your units, or if you have a comp that only focuses on 1 or 2 units. Those are the best users of radiant and artifact items because it concentrates a lot of the power on your team. So if you have like 4 different units you care about, you probably just want like regular items, right? You don't need the artifacts because you need to get more resources for your entire team because you need to itemize 4 different units, which is 12 total items. That's like a lot of items, right? We don't get that every game. But if you have a comp that only focuses on one guy, maybe like an executioner comp that's like you only care about Rengar, or maybe Rengar and Varus as a duo carry and you don't care about anyone else, then yeah, artifacts and radiants are going to work pretty well. There are also weird interactions like Fiddlesticks uses some random artifact items really well, which we'll cover in just a bit, such as like Blighting Jewel. Then yeah, you'll probably want that on him if you're going to Fiddlesticks comp. But that's pretty much when you want artifact and radiant items. Also, let's talk about emblems, pans, and spatulas. Like, should you always take pans and spatulas off carousel? It seems that a lot of people do that, right? And the answer to that is no, you should not always take it because you should only take emblems if you are playing a vertical comp. What is a vertical comp? It's when you go really deep into a trait. That means if you have like 6+ of a trait of anything, like 6 or more techies or something like that, 7 street demon, things like that, then emblems are going to be really good because it allows you to not play one of their bad units or the units that don't do too much, such as like a 1-cost unit. It essentially gains you a unit slot on your team while still getting the full benefit of the trait. Very, very nice stuff. It's also good when you want to hit like the final breakpoint of a smaller trait. Let's say you're going into Dynamo, the max amount of Dynamos are 4 Dynamos, right? And then the same logic kind of applies even though it isn't like a super big trait, right? Like it doesn't always have to be a 10 trait or like a 8 or more trait. Sometimes it could be like one of those 4 traits, in which case the emblem is still pretty useful because you save a unit slot on your team. But those are the 2 scenarios where I would want an emblem. So again, it's when you go really deep into a big trait or if it helps you hit the final marker of one of the smaller traits. Every other scenario, I don't really like them that much. Like if you go a horizontal comp, which dips into a lot of different traits, then you don't really need the emblems because you don't get as big of a benefit from them. Lastly, who are the best users of each emblem, you might ask? Well, it's highly dependent on the comp. However, there generally are quote unquote like best units for that. We could look at the tier list on bunnymuffins.lol. Let's look at Street Demon, for example. I am working out on filling out all these team composition guides, but normally I'll list out the best emblem and spatula holder down here, so you could always cheat if you want to use that. But right now, it's always just a unit that you would play normally. So if we look at this team comp right here, the Street Demons are Zyra, Echo, Mundo, Rengar, Nico, Rand, and Samira, right? So the non-Street Demon units that are already in the comp are Yuumi and Ziggs. Oh boy, I wonder who is going to be a good item holder for the Street Demon emblem. Surely it's going to be the more expensive unit versus the cheaper unit, so Ziggs is probably the best one in most cases. However, there are exceptions. For example, legendary units use emblems really well. And again, it goes with what we talked about a little bit earlier, which is legendary units make great use of any item. That's why they do really well with any of the emblems, because you really just want to put a lot of power into legendaries in the late game. That's why they get a lot of wins, and it's another thing to kind of keep track of. So again, look at your team comp, look at the comp website, and check out which of the units do not belong in the comp. You could always just throw an emblem on them in worst case scenario. But if you can, in the late game, move it onto a legendary unit if they are 2-star and have like items to complement them with. Now let's talk about artifact items. Artifact items are pretty important. Most of them are pretty general and they could kind of work on anyone, but I'll go over every single artifact item and point out units that use stuff especially well. So let's start off with Anima Visage. This is just a generic tank item. You could use it on pretty much anyone, but it's best on like all of those Giga tanks, the ones that use like Bramble, Declaw, and it keeps them up for a very long time. Next up, we have his Blighting Jewel. There aren't too many Blighting Jewel users in this set. Fiddlesticks is going to be the best one. Pretty much what it does is every time you deal magic damage, you lower their magic resistance a little bit. So units with a lot of instances of damage are going to be Fiddlesticks, Shyvana, and Morgana. But I think Fiddlesticks is by far the best user of this. The other two are more so like item holders of it or like worst case scenario holders. Just so you can get a ton of value from the MR effect. Death's Defiance, this is just anyone who uses a Bloodthirster can just replace Bloodthirster with Death's Defiance. There isn't like the best users of this or anything by far. It's just anyone who would use that, they can use a Death's Defiance. Deathfire Grasp, this is just like a generic AP damage item. There aren't too many champs with like resets in this set, so you really just can put it on anyone, but typically Deathfire Grasp is really good on burst champions that get resets and get bonus effects from killing things. So for example, if you have like Deathfire Grasp, you might want to consider getting healing orbs as an augment because you get like a lot of value from that. Next up, we have his Fishbones. This is just an auto attack item. If you are a big AoE damage dealer and you rely on auto attacks, this is going to be the item for you. For example, Senna is going to be really good with this. Xayah and Jinx can also use it, but anyone who uses like Runons would be really good with Fishbones. Gambler's Blade, anyone who uses a Rage Blade can use Gambler's Blade. Twisted Fate, Vayne, Aphelios, Senna, things like that. Gold Collector, any AD unit can use this, doesn't really matter who too much. Some options are going to be Xayah and Draven. Like Draven buffed up is pretty good with this. I've noticed he might be one of the cooler like niche users of this. Horizon Focus, this one deals damage when you stun, and there are only so many units that have AoE stuns in this game right now. It's going to be Zac, Sejuani, and Kabuko. You can put it on like the single target stun units, such as I think it's like Mordekaiser. Someone else does this too. I think Leona has like a single target stun. Like, yeah, it's not bad on them, but it's going to be best on Sejuani because she just AoE stuns, right? Hull Crusher, good on any melee. People prefer it on tanks though. So pretty much any tank or any melee will do. Infinity Force, any carry can use this. You prefer it on like a melee tank to get a little bit more value out of the resistances and health that you get, because Infinity Force gives every single stat except for critical strike, I believe. So if you have to choose between a backline and frontline carry, obviously you'd put it on the frontline, but you could put it on a backline carry too. It's not the end of the world. Innervating Locket, this one is really good on like sustained tanks or tanks that essentially tank a lot and cast a lot. And Weirdly enough, that's going to be Darius. Darius with a Stone Plate Innervating Locket is going to be hilarious because he's going to get his spin off and keep healing and also get the heal from Innervating Locket. So that's why he's going to be really good for that. But any tank can kind of use this if they have any sustaining effects throughout the fight, such as like Cho'Gath and Shyvana. Lichbane is going to be good on any blue buff user. Anyone who casts really often is going to make great use of Lichbane. So Annie comes to mind. Vex, Yuumi, Veigar, they all have low mana pools with the blue buff. So yeah, those are going to be the choices for Lichbane. Light Shield Crest. Pretty much any Bastion or Stoneplate user will use this really well because it's based off of your resistances. So Sejuani, Galio, things like that. Luden's Tempest. This is really good on single target casters or just really high burst damage champions in general. So that's going to be Draven. Draven's high burst damage. He does have AoE, but he is high burst damage as well. Veigar is going to be another example of that. Manazane, this is going to be good on any caster. If you build blue buff, if you build archangels, if you're casting in any way, this is going to be really good. So Annie obviously is going to be the best choice. LeBlanc is good because every time she casts, she gains one more sigil. So this is a way to get her to get a lot of free casts. And then like Veigar casts a lot as well. Mittens can be used on any melee carry. Mogul's Mail, any Stoneplate user will use it really well, but I'd say only take Mogul's Mail in the early game if you have a 2-star tank. If not, it's kind of useless, and you prefer to have another tank item to complement it with so that you could farm gold from this. Prowler's Claw, any melee carry can use this, but it's especially good on Rengar, oddly enough, because I always feel like this item was tailor-made for something like a Rengar. Rapid Fire Cannon, this is good on any melee auto attacker, decent on stuff like Graves, but really any melee auto attacker can use it. Seeker's Arm Guard, this is best on Fiddlesticks, Viego, or any AoE AP melee champions. There aren't too many of them. It's mainly like, I shouldn't say melee, but like short range. Like Fiddlesticks, technically not a melee, but he's pretty short range, right? But anyone that can tank a little bit and deal AP damage, like, yeah, Seekers is going to be good for you, especially with the AoE because it gets a bigger benefit when you get a takedown. Next up, we have is Silvermere Dawn. This one is good on any auto attackers, generally going to be best on melees because when you equip Silvermere Dawn, your unit cannot get stunned anymore. I have seen some people play this on like Senna in the backline, but mainly it's going to be frontline units that use this. That way they make better use of the Quicksilver effect. Next up, we have is Sniper's Focus. Oddly enough, Fiddlesticks is going to be good with this, and the reason why is because he has his unit targeting as like the 3 closest units. So it's not really based on range, if that makes sense. So he's going to be able to get a lot more value out of Sniper's Focus than some of the other units out there. Also, since you build like Archangel Staff on Fiddlesticks, getting some damage amp from Sniper's Focus is going to be very welcome. But pretty much, who do you want Sniper's Focus on? Any long range unit, any unit that deals damage to units in the backline from your own backline, such as like Brand, Ziggs, things like that. Twisted Fate, like he throws his cards out, right? Those are going to be great with Sniper's Focus, but literally like any backline carry can use this. You could even put it on any melee carry as long as they auto attack or need to be safe. Next up, we have his Spectral Cutlass. Best on melee carries, Rengar, Grave, Shaco, things like that. If you haven't noticed yet, a lot of the artifacts are really good on melee carries, and that's just how most of them were designed. Next up, we have this Suspicious Trenchcoat. I don't think there's any OP user of Suspicious Trenchcoat in this set so far, but if you have it, like worst case scenario, what you want to do with it is just put it on any high star unit, so it's best in reroll comps. It's just the way to get the most value out of it. Talisman of Ascension is a bit tricky. You want it on a unit that lives a long time. So anyone that uses like Archangels, Rageblade, things like that are going to work fine with Talisman of Ascension because as long as they could live to trigger the Talisman, they will go absolutely ham. Paired up with, you guessed it, Hextech Gunblade, and you're going to be doing just fine because you just gain a lot of health and you also just like deal a ton of damage when you get this, so you could just go infinite once you get there. But you pretty much just need to live until that effect happens. So like Fiddlesticks with Bruiser, going to be really good with that, of course, because Fiddlesticks shouldn't die because he's healing himself the whole time and he has a lot of health from the Bruiser emblem. So he's going to trigger this no problem. But some tanks that live forever can use it also. Stuff that lives a long time like Aurora could be interesting. Essentially, if you look at your team fights and you look at your units, find out who is not dying until the end of the fight. That's going to be who you put this item on. Next up, we have is Trickster's Glass. This works best on CC tanks, so like Sejuani is going to work really well with Trickster's Glass. Nothing too complicated there because you just want them to get the additional stun effect because you can't put items on them. So if you have a unit that doesn't really care too much about items but does something for the team in terms of utility, they're going to be great for that. Unending Despair. This is great on shield tanks because Unending Despair is based on how much shielding you have. So any of the vanguards can use this really well, such as like Braum and Skarner. and like shield tanks in general. If their ability gives them a shield, you can use this. Witsend's gonna be the next one. Any Rageblade user can use this, but best on AP Rageblade users. So Twisted Fate, he's gonna be by far the best user of this. And yeah, if you get Witsend, you could just hard force Twisted Fate. By the way, a lot of the very special interactions, such as like Blighting Jewels, Fiddlesticks, Witsend, Twisted Fate, maybe like Fishbone Senna, Gambler's Blade, Twisted Fate, Lichbane Annie. Like when you get these items, you could just hard force the unit, like Mittens for a melee carry, Prowler's Claw, Rengar. Whenever it's like a very special shout out that I've given in this video, like you can, if you get the artifact item early on, either from like the portal or like from one of your augments, you can just hard force it. That's how strong some of these interactions are. Because you know how when you do a reroll comp, like you need the 3-star version? Well, sometimes with the very optimized items, you could get away with just a 2-star. So even if you start off the game without any copies of the unit, you could still do pretty well in that game. Last artifact item we're going to talk about is going to be Zhonya's Paradox. This is best on AP champions that do take some damage, but it's got a little bit of a weird interaction. So like I think the best users of this so far is obviously like Fiddlesticks and Viego, because they take damage so they can make use of the Zhonya's effect, and they're AP users that are in the front. So like for Viego, this is just like a better version of Edge of Night, and it essentially supercharges Viego because you have AP from an Edge of Night effect, so he just is super powerful. But it also works on like weird backline carries that stack up throughout the fight. For example, Twisted Fate can use Zhonya's Paradox really well because by the time the enemy team attacks Twisted Fate, he's going to have so many Rageblade stacks that during the invulnerability portion of Zhonya's, he's just going to kill the entire enemy team. And there are some weird interactions like that with a lot of other AP carries that stack up a lot. So that's how you build every one of the artifact items. That's how you build every single champion. That's how you decide what to build on each champion. That's how you decide when to go for like emblems, artifact items, radiant items, and things like that. I believe we've covered everything there is to cover about items in TFT right now. I guess we could cover support items too, but the general rule for support items is that you put them on units you don't really care about that are able to buff the whole team. So anyone on your team that doesn't have any items, like for example, we were looking at the Street Demon comp before, and who's a unit we do not care about? It could be something like Yuumi, right? Like Yuumi is a great holder of the support item because she kind of does something, right? But she doesn't do that much, so you can't afford to waste an item slot on her. In the front line, it could be something like an Echo. So depending on what you get, just put it on one of the units you don't really care about. If you get something like Unstable Treasure Chest, put it on a unit that dies really quickly. If you get a Zephyr, put it on a unit you don't really care about so you could swap it off and sell that unit so you could do custom Zephyrs every single fight. The options are honestly endless, but in general, with support items, you just put it on someone you don't really care about. But as per usual, if you have questions on itemization or anything else in TFT, let me know in the comments below. Join the Discord, maybe you could talk about it there. But hopefully this guide kind of helped you out, get you set up for set 14. I tried to make this video as like time proof as possible by giving you the tools to kind of know why something is good and why something is bad, rather than just saying this is good because on patch 14.1 it's good. Like that's not a good reason, right? You're not going to learn anything from that. So hopefully this kind of solved that. If it didn't, rewatch the video, I guess. And yeah, that's going to be it for me today. Hope to see you all next time.